Cinema Classics is brought to you by the Gateway Film Center, 1550 North High Street, Columbus, Ohio. Further details and showtimes online at gatewayfilmcenter.com.
The award-winning Cinema Classics is produced by John DeSando and Johnny DiLoretto. Listen to the shows online at WCBE.org.
I'm John DeSando.
And I'm Johnny DiLoretto.
And this is
Cinema Classics.
All right, look, we've had Godzilla right there. And you are terrific with your kids, although with Vincent, who's 10 years old.
Right.
Would you take him to Godzilla?
I did take him
You
to
like
Godzilla. I don't see this as a horror film.
Oh.
I mean, I see.
You
Godzilla.
see it as a monster film?
Yeah, it's a giant monster movie, which makes it more science fiction than horror.
And that's our.
You know, and the other thing too is horror. If he doesn't prey on people, and so if there's not that threat of being preyed upon, whether it's by a monster or a human monster, then I don't know that it's horror.
All right, so, and we're talking about kids and horror films, and we're exploring.
And horror or kids in horror?
And horror.
And horror.
Right.
Kids and horror.
Right, like
yes.
Vincent watching Godzilla, and you've already said no because it's not. What about Frankenstein?
He has seen Frankenstein.
And
he loved Frankenstein. We saw that a couple of years ago at the Ohio Theater for the summer movie series, and he loved that. And also, you know, he had seen the original Godzilla too a few years, maybe a year or so after that. And those are great intro movies to the horror genre because the monsters are sympathetic. They don't prey upon human beings. In fact, you know, Frankenstein is the one who's preyed upon, and one could argue Godzilla in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a key difference. Now, we went to go see a movie the other day, and there was a trailer playing for a new horror film. And I normally say, hey, to Vincent, I usually say, hey, you're gonna see some scary stuff. If you don't want to watch it, close your eyes or whatever. I didn't say it this time because I'm trying to get him to watch some horror films. And so I let this trailer play without any interference from me, and I looked over at him, and he had his head down and his eyes covered.
Oh,
yeah, he's very sensitive to that, which actually, you know, I'm kind of thrilled at that in a way, because it means that the emotional beats that we're seeing in the movies I do take him to are resonating with him. If he's still so sensitive to the beats of horror in a trailer, then I hope that he's picking up on what's human and good in the films I do take him to.
You expressed that you would like him to become familiar with more horror films.
Yeah.
What do you think is good about that for a kid?
I just think it's a good outlet in some ways. Not always. I think a lot of, kids, if they're misdirected, can get lost in horror and the sort of grotesquer, baser pursuits. But I enjoyed horror as a kid. I know Vincent is a lot like me. I loved American Werewolf in London. I loved the makeup effects. I love seeing transformations. There is something thrilling about being scared. Now, I don't watch a lot of horror films today even, and I'm pretty sensitive to them myself. I prefer not to watch them alone, and I prefer not to be alone after I've watched one. So I still am a little sensitive to that.
Well, some would say that the horror film that somebody like 10-year-old Vincent could see that would be scary stimulates his imagination, because kids' young imaginations are filled with ideas and monstrous things.
Yeah.
And my feeling is that they can survive these. In the sense they can learn how to survive by just watching the movie and
That's
say,
interesting.
man, I got through it.
Yeah. I see. It's kind of like it is a test, right?
Right,
in some ways, because it's so emotionally intense and psychologically intense.
Yes.
And you do have to kind of confront your own fear.
Yes.
I get that. That's pretty cool.
You remember my comment in the newspaper, I think last week, which I'm thinking more about it, I may have been on to a little something, is that in addition, if you're at camp, and the argument was campy at camp, watching something like this, not only you're surviving it without your parents.
Right.
And so that's even, well, I'm a tough guy, I got
Yeah,
that through it. It's all vicarious, but I
Yeah.
mean, movies are so powerful, they still drag us in.
Right.
You know?
And you know what, I think too, I had really positive experiences as a kid with adults who thrilled at horror films
Yeah.
and shared them with me. So I had an aunt, it was my favorite aunt, and she loved science fiction and horror. And I would spend the night at her house, and she'd make popcorn or snacks or whatever, and we'd stay up and watch these horror films. You know, I can remember seeing like the giant nuclear dude and the Godzilla movies and Frankenstein, any kind of creature feature. She loved that stuff. And also, one of my friend's mothers loved horror films, and it took me and my friend to see a Tobe Hooper film called The Fun House, which was really freaky when I was just 11 or 10. And then when The Exorcist was played on television, it was a big deal. We had I could come over and we could have a sleepover and we'd watch.
That's heavy duty, man.
It is heavy duty, but you know what? Having an adult to kind of shepherd you through those experiences was pretty cool.
And arachnophobia would fit in with your.
Now I have shown Vincent arachnophobia.
Okay.
Because it's fun. I see also too the difference between films like Arachnophobia and Jaws from horror. There's an adventure element to them. There's a fun element to them. You know, I'm not quite sure. I actually showed him some of the extras on the American Werewolf in London DVD. I wanted him to see some of the makeup effects, and I've always told him, "Oh, you got to see how the guy transforms. It's one of the great scenes." And I've explained that to him over the years and showed him finally how that scene was done, hoping that it would lead to him wanting to see the movie.
Great.
It didn't.
But so I waited for the day when I'd be able to show my kids my favorite horror film of all time,
What's that?
The Birds.
Oh yeah. Birds. That's another great gateway.
Oh, I think so too, yeah. And there are some impressions, some visual impressions there. One of them is the birds pecking out the eyes. That's hard to forget. That's a pretty horrible thing. But one of the more subtle horror parts was the birds on the wire.
Accumulating.
I can't see
cutting
birds.
back,
Right.
cutting the tippy headrum,
Yes.
cutting back to the.
I can't see a bird on the wire without being a little bit afraid.
And you once described that really aptly, the horror, why that is so effective. Because Hitchcock, people have, you know, prior to The Birds, horror was not an illustrious genre. I mean, you had, you know, your classic Universal monsters. You had Frankenstein, the werewolf, Dracula, the Mummy.
Good stuff.
You know, and that was it. And then you had some lower tier weird stuff going on, like Freaks.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah.
And but nothing like that. Nothing where I forget how you put it, but what was horrifying about The Birds is that Hitchcock took something mundane.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And imbued it with this this sort of
Who would have thought?
feral quality. You know?
So when you get to Tim Burton, Corpse Bride and so on.
Yeah. Cutesy.
Exactly. This is not the kind of thing that we'd like our kids to build their sense of the horror film.
No, because that's Hallmark macabre.